Okay, so I have a totally different spin on this whole thing than anybody else. I think that this was an attempt to get canceled. I think that he knows that this is actually the best way to stay relevant, to drum up publicity. Ricky Gervais has done it again.
Mr. Reagan.
Over the years, you've probably tried different investments in stocks and mutual funds. You know they can be up and down all over the place. But with inflation running at 8.5%, its highest rate in 40 years, do you really need that kind of uncertainty? Being able to sleep at night knowing your investments aren't about to crash? Well, that is worth its weight in gold. And speaking of gold, if you've been jumping from one investment to the next, the gold IRA with Noble Gold is perfect. With gold, you shield your gains from taxes. You keep the real value of your wealth. You own a global asset, something tangible, and you protect your wealth against economic crashes. What is not to like? And this month, for every cash deal above $20K, you'll get an incredible 3-ounce silver American Virtue coin completely free as a thank you. You can't go wrong with Noble Gold. Call 877-646-5347 right now to find out more, or visit noblegoldinvestments.com. That's noblegoldinvestments.com. Remember when Ricky Gervais said this?
Our next presenter starred in Netflix's Bird Box, a movie where people survive by acting like they don't see a thing. Sort of like working for Harvey Weinstein. You did it. I didn't. You did it. Shut the f*** up.
And remember when Ricky Gervais said this?
If you do win an award tonight, don't use it as a platform to make a political speech, right? You're in no position to lecture the public about anything. You know nothing about the real world. Most of you spent less time in school than Greta Thunberg. So, if you win, right, come up, accept your little award, thank your agent and your God, and f*** off, okay? So...
Well, now, Ricky Gervais has said this.
Oh, women. Not all women. I mean the old-fashioned ones. You know, the old-fashioned women. Oh, God. You know, the ones with wombs. Oh. No, I love the new women. I know the new women. They're great, aren't they? You know, the new ones we've been seeing lately. The ones with beards and cocks. They're as good as... You know, like, the worst thing you can say today, get you cancelled on Twitter, death threats, whatever. The worst thing you can say today is, women don't have penises, right? Now... No one saw that coming. What about this person isn't a lady? Well, his penis. Her penis, you f***ing bigot. What if he rapes me? What if she rapes you?
Ricky Gervais made these jokes at the start of a new comedy special on Netflix, and finally, Ricky Gervais has crossed a line with the left. I reported recently that another British comedian, Jimmy Carr, another darling of the left, finally crossed a woke line when he said this.
When people talk about the Holocaust, they talk about the tragedy and horror of 6 million Jewish lives being lost to the Nazi war machine. But they never mention the thousands of gypsies that were killed by the Nazis. No one ever wants to talk about that because no one ever wants to talk about the positives.
Criticize Christians, criticize men, criticize white people, Americans, even children in the most vicious terms possible. And leftists will cheer. But do not dare criticize the gypsies. Oh gosh, not the gypsies. That's crossing a line. I still think that's the most bizarre line cross in modern times. But the left never made much sense, so whatever. Okay, so I have a totally different spin on this whole thing than anybody else. I think Ricky Gervais did this provocative comedy stuff about trans people. I think he did this intentionally. I think Ricky Gervais is trying to create a bit of controversy here in order to get people to watch his Netflix special. If this comedy special gets enough views, then Netflix will almost certainly order another one. And the more popular it is, the more money he can demand for that next comedy special.
I'm a white, heterosexual multimillionaire, right? There's less than 1% of us.
And so I think that this was an attempt to get canceled. I think that he knows that this is actually the best way to stay relevant, to drum up publicity. So as well as being a comedic genius, the man is a genius self-promoter as well. The thing about Ricky Gervais is that he's got a bit of cancellation armor. He's pissed off the left before, but he always comes back. The left always forgives him. Ricky Gervais has a couple things going for him. He's very left-wing politically. He's a strong anti-Trump guy. He's strongly anti-Brexit, or he was, I guess, before Brexit. And he is what I call an evangelical atheist. He hates Christianity with the fiery intensity of 1,000 suns. In fact, he spends a great deal of time during this new comedy special talking about this, as he has done throughout his career. He even made an entire film called The Invention of Lying, in which he illustrates his belief that the concept of God and heaven are basically just made up in order to make people comfortable with death. He thinks anyone who believes in anything supernatural is a moron. And I, as you know, I am a strong Christian, and so I really ought to find Ricky Gervais deeply offensive. I should avoid watching his comedy out of principle. But here's the thing. I'm torn. I have a strong faith in God, but I also really like comedy. And I don't just like comedy, I respect comedy. Comedy, to me, is an incredibly valuable part of our existence. Now, I haven't endured that much trauma in my life. I've been pretty lucky. I'm not particularly susceptible to depression or anything like that. I'm generally a pretty happy person. But bad things do happen to me occasionally. I have pretty bad luck sometimes. And I get feeling a little bit down sometimes, or I can become bored with doing my show or life generally. And I can be subject to spells of anxiety, and oftentimes I get very, very stressed. And that's probably the thing that I deal with the most, stress. And I mean, we all have negative thoughts or incidents that negatively affect us sometimes. Sometimes these are little things, sometimes they're massive things, overwhelming things. And it's good in life to have things that'll get you back into a positive mindset. Sometimes we can dive into our work, become super productive, or we can work out, we can lift weights, we can go for a run. Women tend to have a good cry. We could watch a movie or TV show and try to escape, or we can just grit our teeth and suffer through it. Some folks actually need therapy, professional treatment. Some people take a pill or grab a drink, probably not the healthiest way to deal with negative stuff. But then there's comedy. And I think comedy can really help people get through the negative stuff in their lives, give them a good laugh, and help people reset. So I see comedy as something that's really valuable in society. And I think comedy is really underrated as a social good. And I also consider comedy to be extremely powerful. If a talented comedian is able to effectively ridicule something in our society, the people of that society can actually become convinced to abandon it altogether. This can be something insignificant like the man bun. Many people might even think that the man bun is a societal ill. But it can also be something very valuable like Christianity. And so I think comedy is a much more important aspect of culture than most people think that it is. But here's the thing. I do find Ricky Gervais's anti-Christian jokes offensive. I do find them repugnant and awful and not particularly funny. And the atheists out there, well, you might say, aha, you're a hypocrite. You're going to laugh at leftists for being offended, and yet you're offended when your stuff is mocked. Well, yeah, but there are a couple of important things to keep in mind here. For one thing, Ricky Gervais does not hate leftists. He doesn't hate leftist things. He is a leftist himself. So when he mocks leftist stuff, it's not coming from a place of hate. However, Ricky Gervais genuinely hates Christianity, and he genuinely considers Christians to be gullible idiots. And he genuinely believes that as an atheist, he is superior to anybody who believes in any religion. And comedy tends to be better if you don't have a bitter hatred of the groups you're ridiculing, because when you ridicule those that you hate, a string of jokes can easily evolve into a rather unfunny, bigoted rant. And I think that's what happens with him fairly often. If Ricky Gervais were able to criticize religion in a way that had me rolling on the floor laughing, I wouldn't take nearly as much issue with it. But if you're going to mock something on stage, if you're going to ridicule something like Christianity, and it's not funny, but you justify this by saying, well, it's just a joke, it just becomes annoying. The second thing I'd like to say in defense of my apparent hypocrisy is that although I don't like the anti-Christian jokes, I also don't think that Ricky shouldn't be allowed to make them. Unlike the left, who believes that speech must be heavily regulated to conform to whatever it is that they want to hear, I'm not calling for Ricky Gervais to be silenced or canceled. I'm not even suggesting that he stop making those jokes. In fact, I would go so far as to say that I would fight for his right to ridicule Christianity. I would fight for his right to ridicule me personally, because that is the essence of free speech. We must protect the right for people to say things that we don't like. That's the whole point of free speech. All the ideas must be able to be expressed so that we can pick the best ones. And that's really why I wanted to talk about this latest episode of Comedy Cancellation, because Ricky Gervais presents a clear distinction between how the right reacts to offensive comedy and how the left reacts. Conservatives and Christians will say, that's offensive, and I think what you're saying is wrong, but I will fight for your right to say it. The left says, that's offensive, what you're saying is wrong, and I will create social media guidelines to stop you from being able to say it. I will pressure companies to cancel you, and I will even pressure legislators to create laws to imprison you for saying the things that I don't like. I mean, if you're so scared that people are going to think your ideas are bad just because the idea was criticized, so scared that you feel the need to stop people from criticizing your ideas, maybe you have bad ideas. And the whole trans thing, the idea that a man can be a woman just because he says he is, that's a bad idea. And so you really shouldn't be surprised that comedians are joking about this. I mean, the idea that we all have to accept that a brutish man with stubble should be taken seriously when he smears on some lipstick and demands to be called Gretchen?
It is ma'am.
I mean, that's just funny. You don't even have to make a joke. Just the fact that this is now a thing that exists in the world is in itself funny. And so of course comedians are going to make jokes about it. Consider this. Ricky Gervais didn't really make a joke. I mean, not really. He didn't present a new way of looking at this phenomenon or use a clever turn of phrase or anything like that. All he did was describe accurately the position of the left. That's all he did. And I think that observation, that description of reality, that was the biggest laugh he got all night. Now, I tell you to watch this special, and if you like comedy, I think it's a must-see, but I will try to accurately assess the special. It's not the best comedy special I've ever seen. It sort of goes like this. The first, maybe 1/5, is funny, really funny. And then he goes into his ridicule of Christianity, and it devolves into this, his sort of standard atheistic rant against religion. Now, again, you may speculate that this is my own bias, and perhaps it is, and perhaps it isn't. But I don't find that segment of the show particularly funny. And then he moves off of the religious stuff, but I'm going to be honest, probably the last third of the show, I just didn't find that entertaining. I was on a walk whilst listening to the special, and I found my mind wandering, and I couldn't really stay focused on the show. It just stopped being funny at some point. That's my honest assessment. I do think that he's a comedic genius, and the first part of the show is hilarious and worth watching. But he did a smart thing, putting all his best stuff at the start. And again, I do think that his provocation of leftist cancellation was intentional. I do think that he made a conscious decision to put in some trans stuff to provoke calls for cancellation as a form of self-promotion. And at this point, that is brilliant. So what are your thoughts on Ricky Gervais? Are you a fan? Do you find him annoying? He is a smug bastard, that's for sure. But I do think he's a pretty dang funny smug bastard. Anyway, let me know what you think in the comments below. That's it for me. And remember, it's not that our liberal friends are ignorant. It's just that they know so much that is not so. Good night.
We have so many people who can't see a fat man standing beside a thin one without coming to the conclusion the fat man got that way by taking advantage of the thin one.
Mr. President, in talking about the continuing recession tonight, you have blamed mistakes of the past, and you blamed the Congress. Does any of the blame belong to you?
Yes, because for many years I was a Democrat.